seconded to approve the meeting. All in favor?
Aye. And Jen, can I do a quick, just housekeeping?
Sure.
Food's here, so your name is on anything that's yours. Mayor, yours is the California roll that's not marked. Restrooms are just right outside the room. And we've got the temp as low as we can make it. So I'm sorry. That's all I've got.
Next order of business is the city attorney.
Mr. Chairman, I asked if I might spend a few minutes talking about roles and responsibilities of budget committee members. I think all of you are relatively experienced. How long have each of you been on the budget committee?
I've probably been on the longest for 7 years.
I think that's 5. 2. So I'm not going to go through the various manuals that are out there, publications are out there. I'm sure you've seen them. I'm happy to send you a list of some excellent things that have been prepared by the Department of Revenue on the process of setting budgets and the basic responsibilities. But I am going to go through what I think I would call the 10 things the city attorney would like you to know about serving on a budget committee. Some of them will be things which hopefully you'll say, oh yes, that's obvious, I know that, that's distinctive. Others may be things that you're perhaps less aware of that I think you should be aware of. The first is that you are essentially presiding over what is a conflict resolution mechanism. And in lucky circumstances, there's not a lot of battling over policy in the context of a budget committee, but in some circumstances there are. And you've all read about school district budget committees erupting into various battles. It's been a while since we've had what I would call bad behavior in the budget committee, but I can recall during my term of service the things that happened when there was a war over light rail, when the light rail company in the city. Part of that fight happened in the budget committee and ultimately resulted in the recall of council members. So it is, in the end, a conflict resolution process. And part of that means, to the extent that you have the opportunity to take testimony from the public, members of the public who don't necessarily have training on how to present in public hearing settings. And your interaction with each other is really the main cue that people who appear in front of you have in terms of what's appropriate behavior and what's not. So I would say you have a great responsibility, which I know you're all experienced in exercising, but a great responsibility to demonstrate to the public how the public's business should be conducted, and how thoughtful interaction takes place, and essentially to be a model for people who might come before you to testify. If you reach a point where there's a substantial conflict, which hopefully we don't have in this session. Second, keep in mind that while you are in session, you are subject to Oregon's public meeting law. Now, what are the implications of that? You're subject to it because of the nature of the public budgeting process, but also because we have a local ordinance that says you're subject to that law. And for the most part, the details will be of compliance will be taken care of by the staff, making sure you're in a room that's ADA compliant, making sure there's a record kept, and all those sorts of things. But remember, fundamentally, that is that you operate as a member of a body. You don't have independent authority to take action. You operate as one committee. And so any official action you take has to be by vote. And that means there has to be a quorum and all those sorts of things. So that the main implication in a meeting is that you don't take action except by vote. It also means that, and I've found this to be a problem in some jurisdictions, not here, you don't have substitutes who can appear when you're not here. You don't have people waiting in the wings to take the place if you happen to be gone. So there's no backup for that. It also means that in terms of voting, you're all equal. Everybody has one vote. Now, in some regards, the council is a little more
equal than others, but not in the conduct of the actual business of this body. The ways in which the council are different than public members is that this is a recommended budget that will then go to the council for an ultimate decision. And the council does reserve the authority to make changes. It's got to go through certain procedures and processes to do that, but it does have the authority to do that. Second, the council is in the position of making appointments and of doing removal. So by code, we serve at the pleasure of the city council. So the council does have the obligation and responsibility in certain circumstances of both appointing and removing. Point 3, you're subject to public meeting law and public records law even when you're not in session as a budget committee. Now, what does that mean? What are the implications of that? It means, first of all, with respect to communications, to the extent that you are communicating on a cell phone, on a computer, sending email, on business related to the budget committee, you're creating public records. So to the extent you're sending those communications to the city manager, to the staff, there are protocols in the city to capture those and to keep them, which is our responsibility. But if you're communicating with each other, we don't have a mechanism for doing that directly, so I would discourage that behavior. But if you must engage in it, then copy the staff, or at least alert the staff that you're using a computer or cell phone that way, so we can establish a protocol for those communications. The other main implication of the fact that you're subject to public meeting law, even when you're not in session, is what's called the problem of serial meetings. A serial meeting is essentially a series of communications between members of the governmental committee, like this one, that take place outside of the hearing setting and are, in effect, deliberation towards a decision. So if you pick up the phone and ask another member of the committee, what do you think about this, that's probably all right. But if you pick up the phone to try to figure out where the votes are on a particular issue, then you're probably engaged in a meeting. And that meeting doesn't comply with the public meeting law because it hasn't been noticed, there's no record of it. So that's a practice that, at least from the city attorney's chair, I would discourage where possible. We've had some case laws limited in Oregon about this. We're not entirely sure where the lines are. We think we know that if the phone calls are just about scheduling a meeting, that's not really a substantive violation of the law. But if it's communication that really is focused on trying to discern where the votes are on a particular issue, that is really putting us in the territory where we could be conducting a serial meeting, so caution. Any questions about that? Because it's not an area of law that people hear about very often.
It's kind of a gray area when you're talking about something, another member, and then it becomes, you're talking about something more substantively, and then you're in violation. So it's like, where do you draw the line?
Yeah, it's tough to draw that line. We don't have much case law to tell us. One thing I would be careful about is if you have an interesting interchange with someone, let's say email, avoid the reply all, but don't send that out. If you think it's an important issue, if you've developed a question, for example, to interaction, send that question to the city manager and get it answered through that. That's perhaps
reply all is kind of a trap.
Yeah. Clearly, you set up the possibility that there will be interaction by all members of the body, and that's a risky place to be.
And that is something that the city council's gotten used to. We get lots of messages that begin do not reply all, but it's probably not something the citizen members are used to seeing as much, and that's a good thing.
Okay, point 4, what happens if you arrive and there's not a quorum? Well, the answer is you can proceed, you just can't take action. So without a quorum, you don't have the ability to vote or take any official action. But you can still take testimony, you can still ask staff questions, you can still make a record. you just can't take action. So I don't anticipate we'll have that problem, but if you should encounter it, I've seen it happen, you don't necessarily need to just scrap the evening. You can still engage with the staff, you can still develop the information that you need to get, and people can then catch up by reviewing the record for the next meeting.
And the quorum is of the body as a whole. It doesn't have to be so many citizen members versus so many.
No, it's the body
I
as a
was
whole.
just gonna ask
That's
that.
correct.
So if there were like one council person and 5 or 4 at this one time, citizen members, that's not a quorum. Or even if there, so what do we have to have a quorum? There's supposed to
Half
be
plus
10
one.
members, but there's really only 9.
Half plus one is the rule.
So,
And it doesn't matter whether they're council members or
okay.
citizens at large.
So half of 9 is 4 and a half. So 5 is not enough. We really have to have 6.
Is it 9
Well,
or
if you've
10?
got 9,
Because we have
then
vacancy.
you can act with 5.
Okay.
You have a majority.
When we're totally up to speed though, and
It's-
have that, then it's 6. Because we'd have 10 people. So
Correct.
5 would only be half, it wouldn't be a quorum. It
How
wouldn't
many
be
do
a
you have
majority.
appointed now?
We have 1 vacancy now, so we have 9
Yeah,
Okay, so you have
currently.
9
So we
persons.
should have 10.
Okay, so you can act with 5. But you need to fill that vacancy.
Yeah.
In order to ultimately comply with statute. Okay, major duties. There are 3 fundamental duties that you need to keep in mind. One is the responsibility to review critically the proposed budget and offer for amendments and questions. The second is to preside at public opportunities for testimony. This is the forum where people can come and testify on the budget and on the implications of the budget. You preside at that. And third is to vote on the proposed budget and forward it to the city council for final action. Once the budget committee has done that, its duties are fulfilled. That's the end of the assignment until the next time a budget is presented, or unless the city council gives you a specific assignment of some kind, sometimes undertake. But statutorily, once you've voted, forwarded it on to the council, that's the end of your service.
So as I hear you, these quarterly meetings are not necessarily required by law. It's something that we just do
That's right.
because we think it's a good thing.
Because it's authorized by the city council. I mean, you can undertake other duties if authorized by the council. So that's the context.
But really, in some jurisdictions, if you had a biennial budget, you would meet to get that budget passed, and you wouldn't meet again for over a year while you went through that.
You
budget.
wouldn't be required to do that.
No? Okay.
Each jurisdiction can itself set up its own processes, but that's dependent on the council's direction and authorization. Now, you're going to learn a lot. Obviously, everybody who's served on this committee has learned an awful lot about the city processes and about procedures, budgets, and policy. And so it's frequently the case for members of the budget committee want to serve further. Just make yourself available for other processes, other committees, planning commission, other things, if you wish to do that. But the service of this committee is limited to the time that you spend reviewing the budget. 6, the role in policy making. It's often said that, and I've been to many of these seminars on this subject, it's often said that budget committee's members are not in the position to create or to stop city programs. And generally that's true in the sense that these programs are usually the product of the direction given by planning that's been done by the city, direction by the city council. But the practical side of this is that whether you're creating a program or stopping a program, when you decide to fund it or not is when you're really making a policy decision. And those are undeniably fundamental policy decisions of the city. So this is policy making in the truest sense. There is a part of the budget that we have, and you see it in most city budgets because there's a statutory reference that speaks to fiscal policies. And it's interesting to look at budgets from different jurisdictions because those are handled in different ways. Some jurisdictions, like ours, have these references to what are essentially administrative reporting and accounting systems, what the requirements are. Other jurisdictions do not do that. They have more general statements about it's the policy of the city to raise adequate revenues to service the city adequately, to provide adequate services. We've got that as well. I'm going to give you my own view of what the statute means. I think budgets are about informing the public about what the policy direction of the city is as expressed through revenues and expenditures. I don't think that the right place to put your administrative accounting processes is in a budget document because most people wouldn't look for it there. I think it makes more sense to put it in a separate document. Identify the document as your administrative fiscal policies, your internal financial procedures. Set up a process for developing those procedures and make sure that it's known where they can be found. I think what the statute means when it says include in the budget fiscal policies is that it means that you make statements there informing the public about what policies you've undertaken and expressed through money. In other words, you might say in a community during a terrible financial crisis, the economy's down, we've decided not to spend all the money that could be available to us because of the financial straits that our citizens are in. Or you might have a policy that says that because we're in a housing crisis, we've decided to fully fund all the programs that relate to housing. You might decide that youth are a critical component of your community, and you identify that as an important policy, and you say that you're going to support heavily programs that deal with youth. I think that's the kind of guidance that the budget really should include, rather than what are essentially accounting policies. I draw the distinction between policy expressed in money and the way that you keep track of it. They're two separate things, and I would recommend that you take a look at that section of your budget and think about how you want to use it. Let's see. Number 7. Can you control hiring for a position or set specific compensation for a position? Anybody have the answer to that?
No.
Okay, good. I think it's important to always remind people of that, remind the public of that. This is not the process by which we decide to fund a particular position in a particular way. What you do is fund a program, fund a policy, and then you look to your staff to figure out how to best make that happen. That's a fundamental, I think, feature of this process we need to always have on the table. Number 8, obtaining information. You have wide latitude to obtain the information that you need to make decisions about the budget. You may ask the staff for information, and they should provide it to you. You can require staff to be present at meetings and respond to your questions. It's a good practice to let them know ahead of time what the questions are, which you can do through the city manager so they can be prepared. I would recommend wherever possible to ask your questions in a public setting like this so that the public knows it's happening, so it's fully transparent. If you have a question, you can of course ask the staff outside the hearing process, but the staff will then make that information available to all. The best practice is to give them a heads up and then ask the question in a public setting. So number 9 is what do you do if you see something you just think is absolutely wrong? And I would say aggressively raise, it's your responsibility on behalf of the public to raise questions. If you see something that doesn't make sense to you, doesn't seem to be correct, doesn't seem to be supported, put it on the table and ask the question. Don't be afraid to do that. If it turns out that it's very fundamental to the budget and it's actually a mistake, I've seen situations where budget committee members were afraid to raise that because they thought it might derail or slow down the process. If necessary, we can fix the mistake, republish, and schedule a hearing. So don't be afraid of process, because the staff and the city attorney's office will figure that out. If you see something's a problem, don't fear raising it. And number 10, my last point is simply to say thank you for your service. It's appreciated. Serving on a budget committee and doing a good job of it is one of the key things that keeps Oregon's local government processes honest. We're not like many states that have great difficulties when it comes to handling money typically. And part of that is the transparency of our budget process. So I thank you for your service. It's much appreciated by the staff and by everyone in the community. And you wouldn't be in these seats unless the public was very confident in your ability to undertake the responsibilities and do it right. So I thank you for that. Now, questions? I tried to keep that under 30 minutes.
I would just like to add that I have been doing this for 5 years, but a few minutes, 10 minutes, it's just was extremely helpful. And I would hope that going forward, any new budget committee member is required to watch this video. Well, I'm serious.
No, I think you're right.
Whenever you start a new job, there's
Yeah.
like safety videos you watch.
Orientation.
Yeah, and it's a great summary and helpful. Thank you.
Maybe when styles change and ties are different.
Well, I definitely agree with that point. I did have a question though, and I guess it's sort of related to your point 6 about not being, about the nature of the policy making, and also about point 7 about not setting compensation or hiring. But I also think we're all, we're a committee, or we're representatives of the whole, right? We don't, like we have some committees in this town, our Public Safety Advisory Committee being one, where we actually pick people to be representatives of their neighborhood. But for this committee, that's not how the citizen members are chosen. And so, so that we should all be having the interests of the city as a whole and not representing a neighborhood interest. I mean, I think that's something that we maybe add a little.
I think that's a solid point, that when you accept a role on this committee, you are accepting the role as a citizen for the whole community and representing the citizens. This is the place where the statute is designed to make sure there's citizen input into the policy making as affects money for the state. And it's clear in the statute that that's its intention. So this is not it's not designed to be an input for a particular interest. It's clear in the statute that it's there to get citizen input into the process.
Kim? Oh, sorry. One of the things you said, I'm not sure everybody knows how we handle it with council, so I wanted to put it out to the rest of the group. If there's a request that comes in for staff work that lasts longer than an hour, there's a request to go back to council and get direction to actually answer that workload, just because it's substantial. And so that's how council has chosen to balance this out. So if there's a request that we figure out how many cities think that the sky is pink, then we will look into it for 1 hour, at which point I'll have a staff person call me and say, well, did they mean magenta? Or did they mean like pastel? And I'll say, we're gonna go before council. We usually, every once in a while I'll do that just at the start of a meeting, where I'll say, hey, this came out, can we just talk about it for a minute? Or study session, do we wanna have it on air or not? And how can we figure that out? So stuff like that, where it's a little more perfunctory, but we try and get through those so we get clear direction in the open body.
Okay, that's all. If the request is, from the community that it would take longer than that hour, do you not spend that hour and just bring it right up?
So if we know it's going to be substantial, we'll say, sounds like a great idea. Get me a couple more votes.
Sounds more
And we'll spend more time on it.
So we'll have to modify the tape to say you're entitled to the information you reasonably need.
Can the committee select a small subgroup to study an issue, such as participatory budgeting that we've talked about at some of our meetings? But it seems like it might be too much for this group all at once. But if you have 3 or 4 members, not a quorum, go out and do some research and think about it and talk about it, and then come back and talk to this group about what they've discovered or learned or whatever?
There's nothing in the statute that specifically authorizes it or doesn't authorize it, I don't think. If it's the choice, if it's the will of the body to conduct business that way, you can. But it's important that the information come back
Right.
here to be vetted. considered.
So that goes back to your earlier point about what's not required by statute is up to city council to decide.
That's right.
It's authority of
That's
the city
right.
council to delegate.
And we have a specific chapter of our code that addresses the budget committee. And we have another section that specifically addresses committees in general. So it's clear in those sections if you read them, the authority vests with the council to make these calls. Anybody an expert? Sure.
We did have one request that we type these up. So we will type up a one pager and send them out to everybody just so you have them for quick reference.
Okay.
And we, just so you know, Jesse, we have been working on doing some of the role clarity conversations with actually several boards. So I am talking to many of the chairs right now just to make sure that we're all on the same page about what their role is. And in some ways, that's education for me. Just making sure that I'm aware of what they believe their role is so that we can also right-skate that against ordinance. And then as boards are coming forward each year to talk to the council, we can have a discussion around the ordinance and what that outlines and then what the committee actually is doing so that we're making sure it's going towards the council's goals.
Sure.
To echo on what Jesse was saying, I think this was good. And I suspect a lot of this was taught to me when I very first started, but I didn't have any context with which to understand it. So maybe after a year of coming back and doing a review like this for especially the new person, whoever that is, it would be really good because now suddenly you've been through the process a little bit, and you have that understanding, and you have a background in which to ask pertinent questions about what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
So I like that idea.
I've found over the years in dealing with budgets that it's you're sort of peeling the layers off the onion and kind of get through to the heart of what it's really about. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, about 6 weeks ago, I met with Milo and had a brief discussion, and after that, I approached the city manager and said, here's some ideas that we're kicking around, what's the best way to move forward, and not violate public meeting law. And she said, well, why don't we put it on the next meeting agenda? So, what I've done is prepare a little script here, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to get on it. I've been on the budget committee for 7 or 8 years. When I first started with Richard Sears and Casey Cameras or Morris or whatever their names. They weren't even employed by the city. They were like staff consultants. And then Casey came from it. Given my experience with the city law, its finances, and kind of in a limited budget committee way, I have some concerns. This is kind of related to number 10. I'm seeing some things that cause me concern and want to initiate discussion with the committee. Like scripts that new finance director, but apparently she's just acting. The first one was the CIP overview. CIP, I go, is it a capital improvement project, or I look at the budget's actually capital improvement plan. It's a big thing, and my interest in it really is related to the perceived disconnect between the Citizen Utilities Advisory Board, which, from my understanding, makes annual rate growth, cost to Milwaukee consumers projections based on future capital program fund requirements, given the enterprise fund's aging infrastructure. So, we've been around for a while, a lot of stuff needs to be replaced, we need to raise some money. This leads into a kind of a built-in capital funding revenue requirement. And it's kind of buried in the way that we do the budget. So I've prepared a schedule here, and I've shared this with Haley, and she sort of brought it into the budget, but there was some discussion that we can't do this for the Oregon budget law. I'm not really sure if that's true or not. But what it shows is, if you take each one of these enterprise funds, and you look at the revenue expenditures, expense expenditures, you get the funds from operations. And then you take a look at your capital outlays. And by doing that, if you look at the reconciliation on the right side of the page, you can identify why our cash reserve balances are so much higher than we thought they would be. So in each of these funds, the water fund, we had a higher beginning balance. We had higher funds available. So we're targeting a certain amount of funds from operations. And that's revenue less expenditures. And typically what happens is we get close to our revenue, maybe not quite there, but our expenditures are quite a bit less. So we're raising more money than we really had planned. But the more concerning part is the fact that the capital outlays are lagging way behind. So for each one of these funds, and this ties down to the change in what we said our ending balance was going to be. For example, the water fund was going to end at 1.1 million, when we're actually at 3.9 million. So they have 2.8 million more, 2.4 million in the wastewater fund, and approximately 3.7 million. So my question is, when the citizen utility advisory board is looking at what we need, are they also looking at what the capital program execution people can actually do? So that's the main concern. The other things I heard about the
Hey, John,
yes.
can we actually start there and then go to the next phase? Because I think if unless it's not on CIP, if it's on CIP, I'd like to actually tackle that.
Yeah, there's just one minor thing on
Okay.
CP, and then we'll go on. I thought we'd have a discussion on that. And then
Perfect.
The other thing I've heard from some of the citizens is there's kind of a lack of a CIP sunset process. So once you have a CIP thing in there, and if you look at it, there's like, we can only fund about 10% or whatever. It's like. So demand for capital investment in the city far exceeds the supply. So what is the process for like taking these projects that were advocated for 8-10 years ago? You know, we know there's never not being money for that. It's just like, can we just get rid of them? So that's my CIP position.
So I actually asked Kelly to prep. This is the biggest CIP we've ever done in terms of these projects and these funds. And part of why she came on board is because she has an exceptional amount of experience working on CIP projects for the state under ODOT, which is a lot of what we're doing right now. My hope is that we can walk through how we're tracking that so that we can have the initial conversation just of how are we going to hit it this year. And then there's a second piece to your question, which is what's the role in conjunction with CUAB? And I actually asked Chuck to come because he's the staff person on the CUAB piece. And I think we probably need to have Vince in the room as the chair of that committee just to make sure that I'm not promising things that I don't fully understand and how they're functioning in that role. And then I think you also talked about reserves when you and I talked, but I haven't heard you say that tonight.
Well, that comes up again in the financial policy.
Okay, so we'll get to that.
It's kind of related to the capital program execution. And if you don't spend the capital money, then the city's sitting on ratepayer money.
Absolutely. So with that, are you okay if I turn over to Kelly for a little bit to go through that first? Perfect. Bye.
Hi, I'm Kelly. I'm the assistant city manager, and I haven't met a lot of you all. Ann touched on it, but before I came to the city, I worked for the state, and I actually did spent a lot of time on programming the state transportation improvement program. So that was a 4-year document that we updated every 2 years, and that was fiscally constrained, so everything in there, was funded. So I'm only telling you that just because it has colored some of my approach as my 8 years with the state. I think my juggling act moving forward is to bring with me the things that help and leave behind the things that might be too cumbersome or too burdensome. So I am still trying to strike that balance. Chair, I will not get to everything that you wanted. I'm going to be sharing some information that I hope is helpful to you. I am actually sharing it at council's request. So most of what you'll see is really on the administrative side, some things that I walked through with them, some structural changes we're putting into place to track projects. But I'm sharing it here with you all tonight because council thought that it would be helpful to the budget committee's ongoing conversations around CIP. So hopefully it gives you good fodder. It won't answer all your questions, but hopefully it'll provide you some good background on the direction that we're headed. So tonight, in terms of what I'm talking about, the CIP covers 2019 to 2024. As was just mentioned, there's a lot of unfunded projects in there. I'm not focusing on those. I'm focusing on the funded projects and setting a target for that dollar amount over the next 2 years that we intend to hit. And what system do we want to use to track that? I'm also here really tonight when I'm talking about money and I'm talking about projects. I'm talking about transportation, water, stormwater, and wastewater projects. I'm not talking about facilities or fleet. I'm not talking about the library. And I'm doing that because the largest growth in the CIP is from the transportation fund.
Do each of those have a separate fund?
Yes. So I'm going to glaze over some of the specifics, and I apologize. I also should recognize that Chuck and Peter are experts in the CIP and the projects that went into that and did all of the work to actually build the CIP. That was not me. I'm here at the end really focusing on how do we take that good work and the good work that you all did and actually deliver that slate of projects in the time frame that we have included. So that's kind of what I'm focusing on tonight. These are those funds that I talked about. So by my poli-sci major math calculation, we're looking at about a $33 million program that covers all those funds. To me, that's the dollar amount target that we're trying to hit. There's projects that make up that dollar amount, but that's what I'm focusing this process on. When I got here, I spent a fair amount of time just trying to figure my way around the building and learn the different fund types because it is different than what I've been used to. But as I started to kind of wrap my brain around the size of this program, that's a large program for transportation, water, storm, and wastewater. For a city of this size, it's quite big. So what kind of charge could we give ourselves to fulfill that size of a program? And so I gathered Chuck, Peter, Alma Flores, our community development director. I engaged Haley and Albani in conversations about what charge could we have to make sure that we're delivering that and measuring our progress. So we settled on this as our charge. This project that I've been working on is to ensure that all program projects in our CIP have sufficient plans and resources to deliver on the city's commitments. We want those project commitments, scope, schedule, budget to be clear and to ensure that any changes to those commitments occur in an efficient and an accountable way. The second part is that we also want to develop a set of performance measures for project delivery so that the city can keep council and the public apprised of our progress on capital projects. So this is my desired state, right? We know what we're doing, we know how we're getting there, we know if we're changing it, and that we have mechanisms to share those changes with council and the public. So this is my little org chart for how we start this process. I'm going to be spending the vast majority of my time on the left side of this org chart. And I have all the next slides are talking about what these boxes mean. But at a high level, you see that our project sponsors that's the council. And then the advisory committees, you all and the other COAB and the other wonderful advisory committees are feeding input directly to council. On the administrative side, we have the owner of the system, that's Ann. We have a CIP steering committee. That's a new-ish thing that we just developed that I'm going to explain what they do in a minute. But the members of that committee are me as the owner's representative, the finance director, the community development director, the public works director, and the engineering director, if I didn't say the engineering director yet. And then beneath that, you see the program managers. I'm going to talk about a couple other roles, but those are the main ones. This is a slide you can't read, and you do not have to read because the next slides are much easier to read. But it's all of the responsibilities under each one of those headings. Before I dig into that though, if you feel like this is heavy on roles and responsibilities, it's because it's heavy on roles and responsibilities. Anyone here that's worked on a capital project or has any experience working on capital projects, the death of them is ambiguity and lack of clarity about who makes decisions and when and where those decisions are made. So that is where I started, and it's where the first phase of this effort has really been focused, is do we know internally on our side who's doing what part of the project delivery process. So that's mostly what I'm talking about tonight. So project sponsor, that's city council. So they're establishing our funding priorities. They're approving the CIP. And they are also a really important conduit because they're receiving all the input from the advisory bodies, all the community input that's coming into the process. Anne's job, she is the liaison between the administrative side and the city departments. She's fulfilling that function, making sure we all fulfill that function. And she's ensuring compliance with all city policies and procedures. The CIP steering committee, this is the new thing, they are responsible for signing all project charters. Project charters are also new for us. So a lot of what we've been spending time over the past couple of months is creating a template. Do y'all know what a project charter is? Is that a familiar term? It's essentially just a document that tells you what the scope, schedule, and budget for your project is. But it goes further. It's actually telling you what the risks are. It's telling you what your design standards are. It's something that a project leader, you'll learn about in a minute, can pick up and go forth and deliver that project. So we've been spending time looking at what are the right components of a charter for the city, what level of detail should we go into, so that we've been spending time on that over the past few months. What this team though does is it ensures that we have that cross-departmental communication about those projects. So more and more we have a transportation, a stormwater project, and a community development or an economic development project, that all those different components are blended in. Many different fund types are actually being delivered as a single project. So what this does is it gets everybody at the same table, weighing in on that and looking at those commitments and signing off on them. And ideally that saves us time on the back end. You also have those same folks fulfilling their other roles. So you have the Peter who maintains all of our projects looking at that right then and saying, okay, yeah, I can maintain that, right? And making sure that's all documented in the charter. So this team is signing off on that, saying, we're good, go forth and conquer. You've got the money in the budget. You've defined your scope and your schedule and your budget. You know what your risks are. Good job, right? Then things happen, right? So this same team is the group that you come back to. Now, depending on, there is going to be some flexibility built into the charters themselves because we don't want to be coming back all the time. But if you're making major scope changes, if you're changing the schedule in a way that's going to push it outside this 2-year time frame, if you're making budget changes or you're seeing a cost increase in a way that you're going to start impacting other projects or other programs, then you need to come back to this group and talk about how you want to reconcile that. It's also where we just track the overall progress of the projects that we want to get done in 1920. So are we on track, off track? Are we slipping things? It's sort of our, traffic control, like looking at where's everything sitting? Are we going to make it? And then as such, what this group is doing is managing the flow of requests, the flow of information to both the owner, and there's a set of approvals that she would need to give, and to city council for the approvals that they would need to give as well. So hopefully it all works better so we understand internally who's doing what and where our projects sit at any given time.
Quick question.
Yeah.
You said something about this being new, the steering committee.
Yeah.
So we've never had this in the past. This is going forward.
Yeah, this is a new thing. Yeah, it's new. And I think what I, in my humility, I think need to accept is I think it's what I'm putting forward right now as a mechanism to discuss. That discussion, we have great people. People have been talking. People have been sharing information in the past. So I'm not making, that's not new. It's this way of documenting it.
Right,
it's a little bit different that hopefully, and I think it's come into play more just because we have had to do more hiring. We have been expanding the engineering team. There's more new faces, there's turnover. So this allows that kind of turnover to occur and still have the core documents in place that you need to get your program out the door. So the activities aren't new, the forum is new. Yeah.
We also, I just want to add, we haven't had this size of CIP, which I started at the beginning with, and I think a big part of this is that we could get away with less in the past, but there's just too many projects.
Stage too high now.
They are, well, and there's bonds sitting in here now, so I get nervous.
So program manager, I had them right underneath the steering team. So the program manager does a lot. So they are drafting or working with their staff to make sure the project charters get drafted. They are resourcing their program. They're the ones that stare at what they say they're gonna deliver and finding out, do I have enough staff? Do I need to go out to consultants for this? They're also factoring that information into what they're programming into the budget. But that's on the program manager. If they have changes that are being brought to them, they are presenting those changes to the steering team. They administer any project selection or prioritization process for their program. So, Chuck is safe, he's working directly with PSAC, to help with those processes. And so that program manager's on point for that. It doesn't mean they don't engage with other people, but it's in their wheelhouse. They are working directly with the finance team to make sure that the CIP fund balances at any given time are accurate, that the finance director has what he or she needs to do their job. They are submitting project information to me for that project tracking sheet that I'm trying to keep up with for the traffic control purposes. And they also have an interdepartmental role that's more informal to play with each other. So are they talking with each other before they come to the meeting about potential changes to projects or impacts to other funds?
So is the program manager different for different projects, or is it the same as, like Chuck, you mentioned Chuck and the SAFE project. Is Chuck the program manager on all SAFE projects, or is some other engineering staff the program manager for certain projects?
He is always the program manager.
Okay.
There are different project leaders,
Okay.
which goes to this side. So the project leader, again, if you've worked on capital projects, this is the person who actually does all the work. And they are really busy, they got a lot to do. They need to manage all aspects of their project to ensure it stays on schedule and within the budget. The charter is really for them, right, so that they have what they need to proceed. They are in charge of managing public engagement. That doesn't mean they do all the public engagement, but it means it's on their list of things to make sure that it does get done. They need to manage the project team. So there's going to be more than this person working on a project most of the time. Sometimes it's a single designer, but a lot of times you may have a consultant that you're working with to deliver certain aspects. Depending on the size of the project, that team can get quite large. So this is the person that, we're getting it back. They're managing that team. And then they are the ones that they're tracking. They know the day-to-day. They know what's happening to their project. They know if there's a problem. They need to tell the program manager if there's a problem, right? And because then the program manager needs to bring that back up the line and say, I'm gonna be short. I ran into a barrel of extremely toxic material and it's gonna cost a lot of money to dig it out. That's not something that we'd identified as a risk. We have to bring that back to the group and say, I've got a new risk. We believe that's X amount of change. So that's the project leader's responsibility. They didn't make another slide for the project team, but the project team's only job is to listen to the project leader. That's all it said. So, and we do want that to be really clear, because the last thing you want is your project team running around and going and finding, the program manager or me or whoever it is and getting an answer, because then it can end up slowing things down if that answer is not the right one. So that's to the hierarchy of at least on the administrative side, how we've set the roles up. You all are really important because the budget committee, we formally engage with you when, if we need to have a supplemental. So some of these changes that I'm talking about may not be able to be absorbed within the funding that we've been provided in this budget. When that's the case, we gotta come here and initiate that process with you all. So that, you're a very critical piece of that advisory committee function there on that side for these types of issues. So right now, we are communicating and training staff. I'm scheduling the team meetings for the rest of the year for that steering team I talked about. Chuck's been really busy working with his team, like I said, on that charter template to make sure that it actually works for them. We're having our first of those meetings in September. We'll be reviewing our first set of charters in that meeting. In October, what I hope that we're getting to is finalizing the performance measures. I didn't really talk about that much here because on the performance measure side, I'm still developing them and I need to work with council to finalize what those are. So when I get that done, I'm also going to be using some resources I don't currently have at my disposal because we're bringing on public engagement team, and one of the tasks in their work contract is to help us create the platforms for how to share the performance measure information. So I need to make sure that all these things work together, that we're tracking things that can actually be measured, that's the things that council would like us to track, and that we can actually get that information out to the public via our public engagement folks. So that's what's kind of on my plate right now. There are also a set of projects that are moving faster than this process. So there are projects that Chuck's working to get kind of out the door because they can't wait to be at a September meeting. So it won't be every last, 19 and 20 projects. I think as we move along too, there may be some projects that are just too small to be burdened by this level of tracking. So I think as the first 5 or 6 months of this are going to be fairly informative, and we're going to need to continue to make tweaks and refinements to how we proceed. Because, like I said, I want this to result in us hitting that $33 million target, right? I don't want it to create delay that then makes that harder because the process got too big. So we're just kind of keep the feedback loop going and go from there. But that's what I've been working on. I think that's it, actually, in terms of what I was going to share tonight. I don't know if y'all have any questions for me. I'm happy to answer them.
Well, I have a couple questions.
Okay.
John, I just want to make sure that I understood your concerns that with respect to ratepayer or the utility advisory board, you believe that, I'm paraphrasing, but that the information they're looking at doesn't show reserves accurately or what's in the bank, and so that makes it difficult to set rates?
Well, yeah, when they're setting rates, they're looking at projected needs, which is very reasonable. But then, given what I'm seeing here, and maybe the change they're making, very impressive actually, what you have in place. But, you underspent, you said you're gonna spend so much money on capital and you spent less than half of that.
Okay.
So you're saying, CUAB is saying, hey, we need this money, and then when you actually get to try and spend the money, you don't have the infrastructure or whatever in place, and so you're collecting money in advance of what you need. So,
Spending on money.
yeah, the observation would be, hey, it's good for the city's credit rating, but if you're a ratepayer, hey, that's my money you're sitting on. And anytime you're in a public setting or a public entity like that, when you have a pile of money sitting there, it's like, well, why don't you just spend that money on something else, which of course you can't do here.
I was gonna say, I mean, the ratepayer, maybe their money is being sat on, but it could affect future rate increases, right? Because that money does not get to be spent on the wastewater ratepayer money. Well, let's not use wastewater, that's not a good example, but the water ratepayer money can't be spent on other than water, right? So if we didn't finish some water projects and we're behind, and we sit on it for a couple of years, and then so maybe the next rate increase gets down, we bring it down, right? Because we've got a bigger.
This is very similar to what I experienced in prior part of my career with Bonneville Power Administration, which you're collecting money to cover your financial risk. And the customers, they're much bigger. They say, hey, that's my money. I'm a aluminum company. I don't want you to take my money to cover your risk or to have a pile of money to spend. So there are some creative mechanisms that could be put in place that look at, you have this plan, what actually happened. Okay, you're underspent. Well, maybe let's drop down our, the revenue requirement for capital. Let's start collecting less. And so the customer gets the ratepayer gets to hold on to his money. Now, when you have a greater need, so there's a component of the rates that's actually elastic.
So you would.
It goes up and down depending on what your actual reserve balance is.
I have two responses. One, I've been on council 5 years now, and I remember the water fund building up and building up. It was sort of the classic fund, right? We knew we had 2 water towers to repair.
Right.
And that was going to be a lot of money. So in your model that you just laid out, we would have been charging, say 2/3 of what we were charging all those years. And then all of a sudden, okay, we're going to do these water towers. We have to now charge you 10 times for the next year so we can do these water towers. Or
that's probably overstating the numbers quite a bit for expository purposes. And the increment of the funding that might change would be at the margin, maybe 5% of the overall rate. So you can put it into your utility bill and say, this is the much for operation. this is what we're targeting for capital program funding. And you track that and say, well, wait a second, now we're sitting on too much, let's throttle it back. So it's still looking forward. You know, well, maybe this money that's sitting in there, that looks like ratepayer money to me, is gonna be spent on capital.
Well,
I haven't seen it yet.
I thought it was a good comment and helpful, and the main question I would have is, and unfortunately I lack the experience, is are other cities in the same predicament where they do take in and increase the balance for a rainy day or for construction? I don't know.
So I actually asked staff to come to the table just to answer a couple questions.
Well, for a rainy day is a good comment on that too, because when it comes to a stormy day and all of a sudden things start washing out or pipes break within the ground or whatever, things that you didn't even have on your CIP and now all of a sudden you've got to take care of them, you need to have the monies in there.
So the question is, what is the appropriate reserve?
So-
Maybe this is appropriate.
If I can add one thing. So we are in the process of starting some work with a consultant, rate consultant, to look at our water and wastewater rates. And part of that study that we're going to look at is what should our reserve policy be for those two funds in terms of how much should you keep in reserve for your future capital projects? How much should you keep in reserve for your future operational requirements and risks? So they're going to be looking at that, and I think by the end of this calendar year, early part of January, we're going to have that study completed for both the water and wastewater pieces. There's the other part that
Have they done that in the past, though? Hasn't that been done before?
I think it had been done several years back. Part of the other thing that they'll do also is they're going to look at the cost to serve each of the different customer classes, our residential customers, our commercial customers, and industrial customers, to make sure that to sort of levelize the field, to make sure that there's not subsidization between the different equitable rate development, if there's not subsidization between the different rate classes, or if there is, to lower that and reduce that. So,
What you describe when you talk about reserve and the amount needed, that's what's best practices. That seems to me different than what the mayor described, in which you know you're going to have to do this water tower in 3 years, and you need to save up for the 3 years, just like I said for my vacations, they're coming up. Are those different policies? Are we talking about the same sort of?
well, I mean, that's part of the policy. So my experience working in Illinois with the water and electric and wastewater utilities there was we actually financed the majority of our capital improvements. And that way we didn't have the current ratepayers paying for those improvements that were going to last 20, 30, 40, 50 years. It was the people into the future, the customers into the future that paid for those improvements over the life period of that. Not all of the capital improvements, but some of the big pieces we did. So there was a certain portion that we financed from the rate structure itself, and then we financed the debt service component as well for those big, large projects. Similar to what I think you've done with the safety.
And to piggyback on that, as far as that is different for how we're operating today. So CUAB does look at the cash carry forwards and looks and projects for those master big projects down the road, and trying to level any increases to minimize large scale impacts to the ratepayers as a whole. So they are projecting 6 years and all 6 years worth of projects that are anticipated within that period. And then they update that every year using the current cash carryover that is given to us by finance as part of the normal budget process. So that is how that is transpiring right now. So that is slightly different than what Peter's talking about, where he wants to go with the new study. We aren't operating that way right now. We're operating just purely looking at the needs. To answer a couple of the other quick questions that you threw out there, the CIP sunset type thing, everything in the CIP is actually dictated by the master plans themselves. So as part of the master planning process, the citizen involvement of the master planning, if if we don't want that robust of a CIP, it really needs to start at the master plan level and scale back everything that's on those master plans, because that's what generates those project lists. And all we're doing is taking those projects from the master plan, putting them into the CIP, and presenting them to the Citizen Utility Board and council, and trying to figure out what gets programmed and what doesn't. So all those projects on there have been identified in a different plan. They just have not been risen to the level where this body or council has decided to fund them. In the past, we never included those in the CIP. We just left them in the old plan, partly at the urging of the Community Development Department. We've started including those so they can then ask for grants. Because without it, if it's not in the CIP, they're getting turned down for grants. So
that's the primary criteria for leaving this old stuff that was included in the master plan from some period ago, is that we might get a grant at some point.
Well, the last master plan for transportation, for example, was 13. It's not that old.
It's pretty old for this town. Well, with all the changes we're going through, that's all I'm saying.
Also, John, it sounds like the citizens that provide those ideas would see that the city still respects their opinion included. I see what you're saying, but
without the chance of them being funded, though.
We do update the master plans every 5 to 10 years, and they are scheduled to be updated again. The water and wastewater master plans are scheduled to be updated in this biennium. They're the oldest. Stormwater's the newest, so transportation's the newest. So that's kind of in relationship to the CIP summit, I guess. It all depends on what the citizens and the council or everybody that passes those master plans decides they want to move forward as far as capital improvements every time we update those. We could obviously update those more often. It's just an expense to set a more rigorous schedule.
I would add though, so there's certain items that are in the master plan that talk about capital improvements or new components to our infrastructure, but also just as important are the replacements of the existing infrastructure maintenance, so we can continue to maintain and operate our systems as well, that are just as important. They may not always be identified in the master plans.
My position on my job, what Kelly described, that policy, we follow that essentially exactly with it. Granted, we have different titles and names, but the practices are similar.
And the team at the top that's...
Yeah, so I'm the Bonnie. This is a weird thought. and if the project manager, it's called the AFE's, request for expenditure essentially. And if they exceed, let's say $100,000 for this pavement or concrete, then the project manager would come to me and be like, hey Jesse, we have to send it up the chain to and because we're outside of the 10% threshold, as you said, because that has a downstream impact to all the other projects that we have planned for that period.
And then one other follow-up point too is that as far as the cash carry forward is misleading. It's highly misleading. We budget for obligation. So in the past, when we had smaller CIPs, we would always target for advertising those large-scale CIPs in the first and second quarters of a calendar. And primarily because that's usually when we get the best bid prices, is in the January through March. The problem with that is you obligate $3 million, but that doesn't get spent until the next fiscal year. So there's a huge carryover that flips over that July 1st deadline that you have to make sure you have in the bank because you've already awarded the contract and given to them. And then it flips into the next fiscal year. And so we budgeted all in this fiscal year is how the past practice has been. And then we roll it forward and recalculate at the actual July 1st date when we get the numbers.
So just looks like surplus cap.
Yes, it's usually obligated.
Well,
for a big project.
I thank the various staff members for their viewpoints. You informed me, I think things are going the right direction here, especially with the structure that Kelly's put in. The financial reserves, I know I'll get beat up on that. I'll just leave that one alone.
I will say one of the things that Kelly's bringing to the table here is we're trying to think now more of all 4 quarters and trying to estimate when those projects are actually going to be out and obligated. That's one of the work that we're doing right now, is trying to figure out and do a better job of figuring that out, which would then stagger out those obligations and those functions.
And that financial reserve covers more than just future capital. It also covers, if you want to have a certain percentage of your operational costs on hand in case you have an emergency. Plus you want to also, for risk purposes, have some money there in case you have some sort of,
So
serious
the study that you're going to be doing with the consultants, I'd be very interested in seeing what you have to say to that, because I've heard, not quantitatively, but just kind of qualitatively, we need a certain amount of money.
Yeah, so
to cover these things. I'd like to see the actual numbers behind the math. How did they get there? It's like on the water fund. How much does that really vary in a wet year versus a dry year? Because that's been used as something that's on us, because we had a dry spring and a wet spring.
So like on that minimum cash balance, the analysis that
Right.
this consultant goes through is they look at what is your capital assets for that utility, and you should have a certain percentage depending on how much risk you want to have. So 1 to 2% of your fixed asset base, and then anywhere from 12.5 to 25% of your operational costs. Plus, you want to have make sure you have your any debt service covered, so you have 100% of debt service for that utility. Plus, taking a look at the next 5 years, about 10 to 15% of your capital improvements that aren't part of the law.
So is that kind of detail?
That's your fit. Yeah, they'll have that detail.
Is that too much to put in a policy document or let the public know? Or? I've seen that in the past before in the last few times.
And we'll be presenting this when the results are back. So we'll be having a public conversation that'll be filmed with the public about how that's set.
My next point, financial policy discussion. We've pretty much had that. I did want to make the observation that during the budget period, there was some intra-committee friction about the quarterly financial reporting policy guidelines, whether they had been adhered to. And so I made a suggestion to Ann that maybe we have like a subgroup just sit down and say, hey, but based on what the attorney says, you don't have to spell any of this stuff out. So my primary concern really is that we treat ourselves in a civil manner, and my personal concern about the financial reserve policy, which I'm trying to get to more transparent reporting, and I would like to see us use a format like this so it's much clearer what's going on with the capital outlays, and they're not buried in, it's part of total expenditures. If you break it out this way, you can clearly see how much money are you generating from operations versus what you planned. And I was going to spend $4.8 million on capital, and I'll spend $2.1. Well, hopefully in the future that won't happen. It has happened in the past. That's why I haven't.
Well, it sounds like what's missing from your thing, and it's not in our budget document, is that commitment, what do we call it? Obligations, right? The things that have been contracted and obligated and not spent.
Right.
So if we had that line in here, your numbers might look very different, right?
Obligations versus, it's a government concept we're trying to do 15 years ago.
I do think it's still worth having a conversation with this UAB. And if you're open to it, John, I'd really like to have you and Vince sit down with me and Chuck and Kelly, just to talk about how that, and Bonnie, just to talk about kind of what they see their role is around that.
Right.
And what they're seeing flying through those projects, just so that everybody's on the same page. I think that that kind of communication is a critical part of making all this work.
Number 6, quarterly report design and biannual budget spreading. So this has been an issue for me. How can we come up with our best budget? So we spend a lot of time in these quarterly meetings going budget versus actual. I've seen a lot of footnotes over the years about, well, that's because it comes in at this time. Well, if you know it comes in at that time, why don't you spread your biennial budget that way? And we have the historical actuals to do that. And my guess is there's probably only about 10 or 12 major items, all across all the funds that have unique seasonal spreads. And can we just get a budget that looks like this?
So are you looking for, I don't know, are you looking for a budget that is specific to show when things like property taxes are
Right.
in that quarter or that month?
Right, well, a quarter, because we're looking at quarters. Franchise fees, anything else, if you just look back at the couple of years of actual reports and look for the one with the large variances.
Yeah, I think the only concern I have with that though is just the timing of making sure that we put in accruals in correctly. Because right now, the process is that a lot of the accruals that we do are mostly at year end because we're working on a modified basis of accrual. So to get to a more accrual approach, it does take more planning, more timing to that effect. But you're looking.
So what is your standard for doing accruals?
What do you mean, what is our stand?
Well, is it GASB or is it
Oh, yeah.
something that provides guidance on?
Yeah, no.
But you're saying you do most of your accruals at the end of the year? Or?
We do a lot of our things at the end of the year for year-end statistics. So when I go over the financial report, we did a lot of the accruals right now.
Right.
For example, revenues that came in 60 days past year-end, because they're measurable and they're acceptable.
Right.
So we book the receivable back to year-end. So when we do accounting now, we book them in the quarter that they were received. We do accrue them back, but we don't do that on a monthly basis, and we don't budget. We don't have our budget spread out.
That's exactly what I'm asking for, is the budget to be spread consistent with the way actuals come in. Is that a major workload or?
But are you asking for an accrual to recognize if it wasn't recorded or
No,
it didn't come in, but was anticipated to come in?
You have a 2-year budget, and you know from history that in certain items, they don't come in evenly spread.
Right.
Well, for those items, why don't you have your quarterly budget reflect that?
See, and I don't think he's asking for accruals to
Mm-hmm.
tidy that up,
Like
per se. Just
Yeah.
recognize this was the budget, so like 80% of property tax comes in once a year.
Right,
And if that's the
actually-
case,
Right, and I understand content previously, actually, we did have what we called a flexible budget in the quarterly report, where it did specify those pieces out.
Right.
Somewhere in the third and fourth quarter, those were changed to actual budgets. So we have in the past, and maybe that's where we can go back to showing that flexible budget in the quarterly report.
I'm
The
just throwing it out there for
flexible-
council's
right.
consideration,
The
or
flexible-
committee's consideration.
The flexible budget was basically showing those pieces to show the seasonal trends. And I
Right.
think that that's probably what you're looking for.
Yeah,
And if we go back towards that,
Yeah.
flexible budget, that might actually be more appropriate than to show the full entire actual budget, the entire year against the actuals that, like, for example, if we did the first quarter and we showed the full budget for that.
right, well, if you call it a flexible budget, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
Right.
I think
From the
that's the
budget.
page,
Okay.
Yeah.
In healthcare, a flexible budget means something different.
So Bonnie,
Yeah.
do you have a stance on that or a take on that? Are you fine going back to that, or do you wanna wait until we have something?
Yeah, I think actually we should wait until the new financial director gets on board. They might have a whole other take on how to do quarterly reporting.
Right.
And I think that that's probably more appropriate to put that on hold for the time being.
What's the expected timing on that?
It's posted. So right now, we're just waiting to start, the process has started. I usually take about 2.5 months for a director of this level. So what I begged Bonnie to continue to be in the acting position. I should disclose, she has said she will not apply. So probably early to mid-November that we'll have them. So they'll be here for the next meeting, for our next quarterly update. And I'm happy to provide that content, and I'm also happy to have them call you in advance of the meeting just to make sure that you actually get an answer at that meeting instead of having to have the conversation again.
Well, the reason I brought it up is because we are going into a new year.
Absolutely.
A new budget biennium. So by November, it would be great to have a flexible budget to compare against the actual.
Yeah. I don't hear any concerns with it. I just don't want to commit somebody that I haven't met yet. So if you guys are okay, I'd like to just give them a week on the job with John. We'll chat, and then we'll present. I think that it's a fair request. I just can't give you a definitive answer without being here.
Give them the staff on the street.
Yep.
So the flexible budget concept, I think that those of us on council are at the, probably the disadvantage here, because I'm not a financial person, so this is, you guys are the experts, citizen reps and our staff. But does the flexible budget kind of balance out so I don't see a footnote that says, number one, property taxes haven't come in yet, that's why this is off by 80% or something? That's kind of what it does.
Right.
It's just about, okay. And we used to do that?
We used to do that.
Okay. Do you know the reason why we switched it?
John asked for us to switch it.
I really was feeling like I remembered that we made a decision to change this.
It takes more time, right, to do the accruals to,
It does
Make
take more
that.
time, and I think actually for the flexible budget piece though, it's actually just the way we put it into an Excel spreadsheet for
Right, exactly.
for visual purposes. So it won't take much time, and we can definitely do it for the next quarter, but going forward, I do think that the new financial director should be more involved in the decision.
The real intent is to be more efficient in our meetings going forward, so we don't have to look at all the footnotes.
No, efficient and also transparent. So I think that one of the things that John and I have talked about in our two discussions has just been, how do we make sure we're being as transparent as possible? If you think that tells the story better, then we should tell the story that way. I don't have a preset notion of what the right answer is. I just want to make sure that we're doing it fully aware of how people are going to receive that information and that it's worth the time and effort.
Right. All right, I think we're done with that.
Okay?
Somebody take it away.
Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and jump into the quarterly report. So like I said earlier, this quarterly report is not audited yet. We are actually going through the audit process right now. We did have our interim audit a couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago. And it went actually really well. So we're anticipating a great audit this coming November, and hopefully having final financial numbers for you in December. So jumping into the report, I wasn't going to go into much in depth on the executive summary. I don't think there's too much differences in there from previous quarters. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump into the general fund. Total revenues were actually on target. They were 100% of the budget in full. But if you go to some of the expenditure line items, the ones I wanted to point out was number 12, which is food services. There were some vacancies and also lower than anticipated expenses. That's why there is a budget variance of 79% in that line item. Most of all the other budgets came in line. One of the two that I also want to point out was police administration and police support services. Police administration came in at 70,000 over budget, and that was related to some retirements that were not previously accounted for. There was also police support services. We were also over budget by 12,000. About 12,000. That was also related. That was actually related to personnel costs and some additional medical expenses related to people changing their medical plans from single to family. These two overages have been reported to the auditors. They are noting it for the file. During the audit process, they will actually take a look at these overages. They will determine thresholds, whether or not it's material or not. And this actually will be up to their determination whether or not we get more for the right amount. But they have been notified. Any questions on the general fund?
So did I just understand that footnote 18 is saying that one person changing from a single?
No, there was actually several.
Oh, okay.
There are several. We had a lot more babies in the family, so.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like everyone had children.
Okay.
Right.
I was thinking one person's change made 12,000 difference. That's a lot. Woo. Yeah.
Okay, moving on to debt service fund. There's really not too much to note here. Pretty much revenues and expenditures are in line. The debt service fund is to account for right now it's the library project, the geo bond that we have for the library project. You'll see in the next quarter, the transportation bond related expenses will be in there as well. Building inspection fund. Again, we are at 141% of total revenue, so that's good news that the building department is actually doing well. We've had more building in this last year. And then expenditures are 96%.
So there's a big demand for building inspectors, and do we have enough staff there?
It's a great question, and you actually allocated a half-time FTE during the last budget cycle for that office specifically. And we also allocated a half-time FTE towards engineering for a tech position. We were gonna do that as the same position. We're actually breaking those apart now because Chuck's team is gonna be moving to City Hall. So we've been working with community development on that question, but we may have to come back to you with a supplemental depending on where we're looking our permits are at for building. My question to Sam has been, have you been above what we requested? So have your projections come in even higher in terms of the amount of use that we're having than what we gave you guys during the budget cycle?
I've had an opportunity to work with her on several of my projects.
Yes.
And she's been very prompt, but I know that some people may hear that there's,
There are split ups.
6 to 8 week lags.
They are 6 to 8 weeks.
That concerns me.
The issue right now is whether it's hedging the economy, basically. Do you hire and risk over hiring and then having to terminate during that process, or do you bring in a consultant during that sort of larger window to try and cover?
If you can find one.
If you can find them.
Same thing with hiring now.
And what, didn't we agree to cross, don't we do some swaps with other jurisdictions where we back them if they don't go?
Yeah, and our electrical engineer, I believe, is actually in the county. And so originally what happened is, I believe, 2 years ago, almost to the day, because it was right before I started my job, Sam came before all of you and said, I really need another FTE. You said, great, here's the money. And then she tried to hire it. And then we couldn't, because there simply were not enough. So every city at this point is literally stealing from each other. So I stole someone from Oregon City, point blank. I also did that for engineering. And then we lost somebody to Happy Valley. And then, right, it's literally this cycle, because there's only so many people that you can have who are interested in the market. So then Sam went into trying to use a consultant to do a lot of that work. That's what Councilor Beatty's talking to. Then we decided to go at it again during the budget cycle. So we said, okay, we're gonna try again. We'd like to come back and get a 50% FTE, and we'd like you to have that person work with Chuck's person because both of them needed to go out on site. Now that position's been posted, I don't actually know if it's hired. So I mean, it's literally just the cycle. I don't disagree. Oregon City's having the problem, Happy Valley, Westland, Gladstone, the county, everybody's having a hard time with building inspection right now. Portland, we are in a massive explosion. But I will take your questions as advisement that maybe you're hearing things from other people, and I'll talk to Sam.
I just know there's a lot of activity in this town, so ride my bike.
There's a ton.
And I don't think it's going away anytime soon, so. I know this fund was in trouble 2 or 3 years ago, 5 years ago.
It still is.
But it was because.
Because it was down.
There wasn't enough activity, and now it's just boom.
Yeah, and it's a question for me as to how you fill those FTE counts so that you don't terminate people in midstream.
That's why they pay the big dollars.
So I can terminate people in midstream. That might be true.
And we have that same issue, like, so I'm in the commodity business, and as a commodity, it have peaks and valleys, and I've encountered it firsthand when people are brought on, and then cyclical goes downhill, and they get laid off, and just people with families, and it's a problem that not only the cities are enduring, but in the private sector.
And is there no hiring, like a fixed term contract, like making it be a 1-year contract and not?
You pay a premium and you get fewer applicants because people are less excited about leaving a permanent position.
Just the brain drain, the person has expertise and you train them, spend all of that HR expense, and then they leave.
And people forget when the economy's great, how great government is. And then it goes south. And then suddenly we get tons of applicants in fields where we don't need them as much anymore because we no longer have the glut of work. So it's a constant balance, but it is something that we may have to come back to you in November when we want. If Sam can't fill this position, we've already had the discussion that we have to come back.
So, and do the current employees, the way to flex up, is it to have overtime?
Overtime or to bring in contractors more often. We're spending a lot of money, but they also are making a lot of money, right? So the permits are covering a lot of those costs right now.
Right.
So you can bring in people using those dollars, but it's not perfect.
Yeah.
And Sam's working a lot. And her front desk person, who's now, I believe, a tech, is that what the position is? Phenomenal. Absolutely fantastic. And she is who we stole from Oregon City, just so everybody's
So is she permanent?
She is.
So,
As long as
Until she gets rated. Very fun.
The library fund, so, again, we're at 106% on total revenue. Some notable items there is that the miscellaneous, by then you'll see that 895%. A lot of this is related to, interest revenue related to the bond, the bond. There's also some additional items, there was a $2,000 rebate from the Energy Trust of Oregon that was received. And there's some other little things, but the majority of it.
Footnote 2, 895%.
Right.
That's a large number.
The other thing I was going to point out, you'll also see a budget overage here on materials and services. However, that is related to the debt. That was in FY17, going after the GO bond. That is exempt from local budget law. I believe that's been discussed before in the past.
So maybe not a question for you, Bonnie, but do we know the completion date of the library expected?
I have some exciting dates. I don't have that one. I have the library's closing on September 24th, and then we're packing up and moving. We're expecting to open over at the Mod Space the weekend of October 12th. We're going to be doing a groundbreaking in mid-October. And then it really comes down to the fact that we will still be doing some construction during the rainy season. So if we have issues due to that, it could delay it. We've given ourselves 18 months, but we're hoping that we'll be done in 14.
February 2020, something like that.
Yeah.
T would be December of next year.
December of next year would be, well, so it's from the date that we start construction. So yeah, December would be our best. My guess is with holidays and everything, even if we got the building done, we wouldn't be able to get in until January with holidays and vacations.
My wife loves the library currently, but when asked me when it's going to be done, as if I have all the answers.
You never have all the answers that I have.
You've done your duty.
Yeah.
And I know that everybody knows, but we did win the court case. So we are not worried about defeasing bonds. That would have been an issue that we probably would have had to have talked about if we weren't going to proceed because the design didn't work or there were other issues. But we won that case, and so we are starting construction as fast as we possibly can to maximize the dollar with the current climate, which is going up at 1 to 2% a month.
The next page is the transportation fund in total, but I'm going to actually just skip over that and go on to each one of the funds separately. So the street service, the SS&P. The main thing you'll see here, and you'll probably actually see this in multiple of the transportation funds, is the capital outlay. There's a lot of capital projects that have not been completed. Again, you'll see that in the project report that's on the back. So if you have any questions, definitely we can go over some of those. Chuck and Peter are here, so that's a good resource tonight.
What it says capital outlay?
Those are the capital projects, capital outlay.
So it's only included if the project is complete? If it's like work in progress, the money that's spent is now in limbo, or?
No, this is money that has been spent towards the.
Yep.
The same goes for the SAFE fund, the Safe Access for everyone. The main thing here you'll see is that intergovernmental revenues are below budget. That's usually related to capital projects. If we haven't used or if we haven't prepared or started a capital project, then those intergovernmental funds don't usually come in. So there is a lag, a timing lag there too. Moving on to state gas tax. And again, this is the same here, so it's kind of a broken record. The capital projects, again, you'll see that there's only 32% of capital outlay for the entire year, and those are related to the capital projects, for the projects that we have not started.
But those are projects where, I mean, this is the end of the budget cycle, right?
Right.
So that's money that we have actually spent and just haven't been billed for, or?
No, so the actuals are what we've actually spent on for projects. So
Okay.
and we can find those projects in the back of the report. But we had budgeted for other capital projects, those may or may not have started, and that's why there is a variance in the budget.
You did a cash carryover during the budget process to actually move money from this year to next year for some of the projects we're already stalled out. So I think some of our bigger projects, like Meek Street that we've been talking about, got allocated into the next budget, and that's where those dollars are now sitting. And that may be a terrible example because I can't actually think which one we did that on, so I'm sort of on the fly here.
I was gonna say, that's not a SSMP, but okay, yeah.
Moving on over to the water fund. Total revenues were 98% of budget. So those were in line. And then also expenditures were 74% of budget. The main thing to point out here was materials or services were less than anticipated. Those you've seen definitely throughout the past year that electricity facility repairs, rents and leases have been less. So we came in under budget as far as materials and services go. Then moving on to the wastewater fund. Again, we're at 100% of total revenue, so we're right in line on budget, and then 86% of total expenditures. Again, these are mostly related to capital outlay. There's 1.7 million or 38% that was not spent.
When we're putting in the miscellaneous, because it seems like those are off quite a bit, is that just gonna be something that we should expect all the time, or is there, I mean, when you see 2,534% difference
Those are primarily related to interest revenue.
Interest revenue on those piles of money that I had. Pretty much. Okay.
Several, yes, there's
Can't deny
several. And so right now, interest is allocated and lumped into miscellaneous. I mean, we do have a separate line item for interest, but I think that we talked, I think several quarters ago about actually splitting that out so that you actually see that. I'm not sure if you
I'll
want
make a
to.
motion for that.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if you also want to have that so specifically out there to have the interest.
Might be inflammatory.
We can easily add that line item. So if that's something that you would like to see, because it actually does kind of skew what miscellaneous and interest revenue.
The big percentage numbers are kind of like, what is that a typo?
And those were not anticipated in the budget.
So on average, Bonnie, if you had to take a guess, percentage of when it's like 1,000%, is it 800% higher because of the interest? Meaning it would be the easy, I merely wouldn't want you to have to list out 4 others, the material items, if you broke out interest within miscellaneous.
I would say primarily yes. There's other things that are also in there, like sale of assets. We have other dividends that we receive. we have other income that comes in, but the majority of it.
I should fully disclose that our facilities director has been exceptional at selling things that have been lingering on a piece of property we have. So we have actually sold, I think it's up to $200,000 worth of goods that we do not protect, just because he's been cleaning out Harvey, which is great. We had a problem with surplusing property for a while in terms of what that relationship was and finding a company that could go through the procurement process with us to do it. And he's found that niche, and now he and the assistant for facilities have literally been inventorying that stuff and getting it sold quickly.
Don't come to my basement.
Right. We're excited to have Harvey
Another
back.
quick question, maybe the mayor knows. Is east of, on Johnson Creek, east of Fred Meyer's, those houses that look like they're from Walking Dead?
Oh, the jack up on stilts?
Yes.
Those are,
Is that in the city?
no,
Okay.
they're not, that's unincorporated, but I believe they're owned by
Emerald.
Terry.
Because I saw them on like 224 for years.
Right.
And
Yeah.
124, always thought, what is going on? And then shocked to see that they're
Moving.
placed near residential as well.
Okay, moving on to the stormwater fund. The annual is paying $795 we did not execute the internal fund loan, so there was a variance in the proceeds from issuance of debt. And then moving on to expenditures, we're 63% of budget. The majority of that is related to cabinet outlay, so there's 35%. The next page is the system development charges. We are 254% of the new budget. Those are related to more activity that we have throughout the city, and again, interest. And then the urban renewal, there's been no activity. We're at 72% of the new budget.
The systems development charges, that's all of them, we lump them all together, they're not divided out by utility?
We have it separated out by utility in our accounting system, but for reporting purposes, we bring them all together.
And does this include the ones that are pass-throughs to WES and to NCQRD?
No, those are all on liability accounts. Okay, so with that, do you have any questions on the quarterly report?
Yeah, I want to go back to the state gas tax real quick. State gas tax. That's trending down, statewide, but when is the new amount that they're going to be charging start to hit our books?
I believe there's a several month lag on that. I don't have an exact date.
Do you remember?
I thought it started being collected January 1.
Yeah, I think it's
did.
actually already in effect. I don't know when the next jump is.
But
There was
yeah, I'm
4%.
curious about that lag.
I think it went into, I thought it went into effect in January, but then there was a set of thresholds that had to be met, and then if the state meets the threshold, then it jumps up again. And I can't remember the time frame for that right now. I think it's in three years, but I can confirm and send it to you. Or I can look it up.
So we're paying more money and the state's collecting it, and we're gonna get some of it at some point.
Eventually.
But we're not getting it, if they started collecting it in January, we're not necessarily getting it in these.
Right, we haven't received.
I can't speak to what this shows, but I can get you the schedule of when it's supposed to go up.
Any other questions?
I want to thank you all for your patience and especially given the elevated temperature in this room. I'll accept a motion to adjourn. Moved and seconded to adjourn, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We're out of here.